All right, everyone. Welcome to the Merge Mississippi podcast. We are on YouTube at Merge MS, and we are on Facebook. We are also on X, Instagram, all the socials that you can find us on. So, super excited tonight. This podcast, we started small, we started young, but we merged with the group, the Conservative Coalition of Mississippi. We have been working with a lot of groups actually, but the point of doing this was to create a place where we can merge faith, freedom right here in the Magnolia State, something that no one really else is doing. I'm Chris. I'll be your host tonight, coming to you live right here from Pearl, Mississippi, or should I say recorded, excuse me. But on this show, we don't want to get stuck in the endless Republican versus Democrat tug of war. Instead, we really try to focus on cutting out the noise and talking about what's truly right versus what's truly wrong according to God's word. I'm super excited because we have Professor David Clements. I'll introduce him and talk about him a little bit in a second. Professor, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to be with you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you. I'm grateful for your time and everything you do. And just want to kind of go over some things with you of just a little bit about what we talk about and how we kind of run things here. But I'm going to give you a lot of talking time, and I got some questions for you. I sent you some talking points of some things I wanted to discuss and kind of go over. A little bit about what we heard last week. I met you at a election integrity of Mississippi event, and the things that you had was just, I mean, it was great. You know, I'm a political science geek, I guess you could say, so it really just resonated with me and like, man, this is just factual stuff. But a little bit about how we do it is we try to explore everything from a biblical principle perspective. We like to apply church and state and look at things at how they resonate as far as are they biblical and are they aligned with biblical principles. We usually look at a lot of state legislation. We look at federal legislation, news, things that are going on in the media, to try to distinguish, what's what. And we try to allow every believer to engage the system and show them how to engage the system, and also why they need to walk boldly, not as partisans, but as followers of Jesus. And I was really digging into your YouTube page over the past couple days and just kind of digging into the content. And man, you lead with truth, you lead with courage, you lead with grace, and I appreciate that. And I think that the work you're doing and the work that we're trying to do is really point people to Christ and help transform not just our communities but America as a whole. So what we're really doing is, like I said, breaking down what's happening at the Capitol here in Mississippi, unpacking cultural issues through scripture, sharing why faith demands action from people in the public square. And our goal is simple, like I said, to equip folks to live out their calling fearlessly for the kingdom of God. So thanks for joining us. I really appreciate you again. And right off the bat, I just kind of want to open with, something's wrong in America, and it's time to repent. It's time to rise up. It's time to fight for our kids and what we have going on in the world today. In the last 10 years, we've seen Hunter's laptop. We've seen the Clintons. We've seen election irregularities. We've seen COVID. All these truths that have gotten uncovered. Americans feel it in their gut that something is deeply wrong, and too many of us don't know what to do about it. But maybe that's the problem. We've been trying to figure it out on our own for too long. So I want to talk about you a little bit and just kind of where you come from. You're a courageous, former prosecutor, business law professor, one of the most respected voices in the movement for election integrity and transparency in American elections. So look, we'll get right into it then. What I'd like to talk about is the documentary. Can you tell me a little bit where that came from and kind of why that started?
Yeah, I've given hundreds of evidentiary presentations, and it's great. You get to figure out what resonates with we the people, but at the same time, you can't reach enough people if you're just doing in-person presentations. So the documentary was really just the need to reach more people. So I've gone to 49 states. I've identified problems with election system architecture everywhere. And the film is basically the definitive film when it comes to subversion of the election system. Why every state has a problem. It's not just a New Mexico problem. It's not a Georgia problem. Every state has been subverted. The architecture's been subverted. So the idea is to get out there and alert people to two different forms of slavery. One was the actual physical bondage of J6 prisoners that were locked up for protesting the rigged and stolen 2020 election. And the other form of slavery is what we all are still participating in to some degree, which is our elections are largely political theater. And I can get into the details about why I know this to be true, but that's really the what the film is about. Is it's an Exodus story. That's why it's called "Let My People Go." And I think this is the year that we're actually set free through national security executive orders that are going to be issued by Trump. In fact, there's a story that was just put out today about the radical left's concern that he is going to issue the mother of all election integrity executive orders. He's already telegraphed on his truth post that we will not be using mail-in ballots outside of the military, and the uses of years past, this whole phenomena from 2020 where we have mass mail-in ballots being counted after Election Day, those are the days of the past.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I watched it last night with my wife. It was super interesting because I think that after J6, a lot of people didn't realize that the reason that happened was because of January 3rd, and people went to jail, and people were called conspiracy theorists, people were called crazy, people were called radical. They called Trump crazy, obviously. Um, and as a former prosecutor, I mean, there's a lot that you can find that is truly evidence that now backs up of all the election fraud that took place in 2020. Is that correct?
They have not rebutted a single claim that we've made, at least the teams that I've worked with in the last 5 years. And we've worked with nation state experts. Now, the gaslighting that we face from the legacy media is off the charts, but when you actually look at the data, there's a reason why the preeminent quote unquote political scientists and election experts won't debate the experts we have. We're talking about people with Q and SCI clearances, the highest clearances on planet Earth. These are experts that have worked in our national labs, and they understand that it's not hypothetical. Our elections have been subverted by advanced persistent threats, both externally from foreign adversaries and from domestic enemies, people that have partnered with globalists to weaken the vote. And so Tulsi Gabbard has announced as much during her cabinet meetings. They've seized equipment in a U.S. jurisdiction that I won't name. We're not guessing. So when we present, the findings that are in Let My People Go and in other places, there's been massive opportunities for people to debunk it, but they don't want to get in the room with the experts and have that conversation. We even did 8 county audits in New Mexico, mailed physical copies of the audit findings to every politician in the entire state. And, we're usually treated with abject silence. Just don't bring any attention to it because many of our government officials, I'd say most, are beneficiaries of this system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's again that's why it intrigues me so much. It's because it's right there and it's black and white. I think some of the graphs and some of the information and the wording can be kind of complicated for people, and I think it gets over a lot of people's head. But when I look at it, I'm like, this is the stuff that movies are made of. I mean, it's just really interesting to see that, once you crack the code that I think you've kind of cracked, but people could just kind of always felt it in their gut that something was wrong and that there wasn't something right. And then once you put that evidence there, then you see that they're not wanting to fight back. They're not wanting to have that debate. It just exploits it even more that this is all, just a bunch of junk. Um, So real quick, can you walk us through the system? I mean, the poll books, the tabulators, just I know you talk about this all the time, but the delivery devices, the EMSs, how that whole system works and just kind of by law, are all systems supposed to be hooked to the internet? I just kind of want to run over that real quick.
Well, I don't know how quick I can be because it's a big system, but I'll tell you that there's three points of entry into the election system. One is to vote in person, if you've got that option. The second is to mail a ballot through the postal service, and the third is in jurisdictions that have drop boxes. And so at some point, your ballot is going to enter into the system through your feet or through the mail or through a drop box. But if you walk into a voting center, you'll usually be greeted by two very kind ladies. Most jurisdictions have moved on from paper poll books. That's the piece of paper you sign to get a ballot. And you now basically fill out a touchscreen device. It looks a lot like an iPad. It's called an electronic poll book. And yes, it's networked, it's hooked to the internet. In fact, it only has utility if it's hooked up to the internet, because the whole point of the poll book is to determine whether someone has come and shown up and already voted in your stead. So the whole point is you'd have to have it networked to have the real time data to make that determination. You get your ballot usually right there, it's printed up, and then you walk into a booth and you fill out your ballot. Some places you actually fill out the physical ballot. Others you actually touch a screen and it prints out something that has marked your ballot. At that point, you're going to submit it into a thing called a tabulator. It looks like a big trash can, and might as well be, because that's the last point of contact that you will have with a physical artifact. After that point, your guess is as good as mine as what actually happens to your vote on the ballot, because poll watchers can't see how those machines work from the inside. And so we've broken many stories where logic and accuracy tests, these are the tests that basically validate that those tabulators are safe to use prior to elections, in many respects have been subverted. There was a big story out of Tarrant County where votes were added even during the test, and even more disturbing, the ballot images were manipulated. So, if you're a bad actor and a cheater, all you've got to do is beat the logic and accuracy test, which is very easy to do because you can mess with the actual physical hardware. You can plant malware. You can gain access to the system with internet and without internet. Internet's really kind of irrelevant. If you know what you're doing, there's a way to get into those systems with very little problems. But after election night, you'll have election workers that will retrieve data sticks from each of those tabulators and upload them into an election management system. It's just a fancy word for a computer. And they will basically upload the jump drives, jump sticks, flashcards into the EMS, which is, again, networked. It's hooked to the internet by law. It has to be, because that's the only way that you can transmit the results to the Secretary of State. And then you've got two outputs, as far as what the data that you're seeing out there in the world. One is through the Secretary of State's website, and the other is through this thing called Edison, which provides the detail on the TV screen when you have a tracker that gives updates on how certain races are faring. So that's the input to output life cycle of a vote. As far as the mail-in ballots and the drop boxes, you just have to know that at some point an election worker is going to collect those ballots, run it through that same tabulator, and you'll have the same outputs. But nonetheless, when we examine vital records, these things called cast vote records, they show in virtually every jurisdiction, but for a handful, an impossible arrangement of votes, which indicates one of two things: actual subversion electronically before, during, and after an election, or there's a front loading of mail-in ballots that favor a predetermined candidate through old-fashioned ballot stuffing, and we see evidence of both.
Yeah, so I mean, these machines they can fill out the ballots. I saw in the documentary where there was counterfeit paper being used. results being changed. Like you said, for the predetermined candidate, there was numbers that were going up after the polls had closed, and they were still checking in. People votes were still coming through. Poll workers were seeing the numbers change. Tell me a little bit about the cast vote record. That was really interesting to me, and just kind of how that works.
Yeah, it used to be readily available, but when clerks and secretaries of state learned that we could determine impossible arrangements of votes, they stopped producing those records. It's really the only thing that we have that tells us whether the black box has been subverted during the election. But the principle is pretty simple. Most people are familiar with polling and what makes a poll scientific. It's this thing called the law of large numbers, and the idea of a poll is, if you want to see what the preferences of people in the state of Mississippi, and you've got a population of a couple million or 3 million, you don't have to poll all 3 million people to determine how Mississippi feels about a product or a candidate. The idea is you just take a random sample, and your survey, provided that you have a large enough data set, at some point you'll see a normalization of data. And so that's why it's called the law of large numbers. With one or two surveys, you can't tell a whole lot. With 20, you can start seeing something. Around 200, it locks into a straight line. And so the idea is, as long as that there's no particular order or method to how you're surveying people, and it's completely random, no matter how many times you take a random sample, at the same inflection point, you'll see a normalization and flat line of the data. That's how pollsters can say, within a margin of error of 4%, this person's going to win. And typically, you could take those polling results to the bank before we had the amount of electronic subversion that we've got now. Now, honest pollsters will tell you that it doesn't make any sense because there's so much fraud through the mail-in ballots that the polling isn't really accurate. Now, you'll still see push polling, but the idea is this: just like someone can conduct a poll or a survey, and it can be a scientific poll, there are certain records within those voting machines called cast vote records where you should see the same phenomena, especially when you're looking at mail-in ballots, because mail-in ballots are typically randomized. There's no definitive order. There's no pre-sorting. So people count them in the order in which they arrive. And so you would expect to see the same thing. Some variability and wiggling in the early stages of gathering those ballots and scanning them, and then a flat line. Instead, we're seeing a front-loading of votes for a preferred candidate and a linear drive towards a predetermined set point, which is impossible if you're looking at the way people vote. So the idea being, for mail-in votes, in states where you're not automatically receiving a ballot and you request one, all of us request ballots at a different time. All of us fill them out at different times. When we put them back in the mail, we put them in at different times. So when a clerk or a clerk staff is retrieving those ballots, they're scanning it in the order in which they receive them. So why in the world are we seeing this descending linear controlled pattern that reflects a PID control, which is a closed feedback loop system? Because the only way that would make any sense is if you had these impossible ratios showing up. So what do I mean by that? When we look at the cumulative ratio of votes delegated to Trump versus Biden in the 2020 election, the cast vote record will give you blocks of 100. Sometimes it's a little different, but it's usually blocks of 100. And you look at the first block and it says 90 votes for Biden and 10 votes for Trump. It's like, okay, well, that's interesting. But then the next batch of votes comes in and it's 89 votes for Biden, 11 votes for Trump. Well, that's weird. Now we're descending. We've got a glide slope that's about to be created. And then the next block comes in and it's 88 for Biden, 12 for Trump, 87, 13, 86, 14. 85-15. Now, there's no way ballots in the natural world would arrange themselves in this descending pattern. Has all of the hallmarks of a controlled race. So basically what it tells us, the data tells us, is that during early voting, bad actors are determining what the delta is between registered voter turnout between Republicans and Democrats, with the assumption that registered Republicans vote for Republicans and registered Democrats vote for Democrats. And they can determine what the distance or the gap is between the two. And they start filling out a requisite number of ballots to flood the system, or perhaps they're doing something electronically. But you'll see that descending pattern is basically their cheat to fudge the numbers because they know exactly how many they need to inject into the system. And it doesn't help them to have a giant margin of victory. So when I say that there's a descending pattern, sometimes it's counterintuitively. Why would the numbers go down? Well, because no one would believe Biden actually won 90-10 or 89-11. But they will believe, a 51-49 race. And usually what happens is that that descending linear drive will end at a believable margin of victory. But the pre-selected candidate usually always wins unless the voter turnout on election day is so great that it blows up their modeling.
Hmm. So, and really, it's only the cast vote record that's going to be able to show us that graph. Is that right?
Well, there's other data. It's not even that the cast vote record will show you the graph. We have experts that create the graph from JSON text files. And so you're looking at numbers. But if you know what to do with those numbers, you can chart it out and it'll paint a picture that shows that linear drive, which would bear no semblance to natural voting behavior. You would never have something that's that tightly controlled. But to the degree that you can get the source code, certain digital files that are usually held under lock and key and never given up by the vendors, there's certainly other cyber forensics that you can look at to see if there's cheating. But usually the vendors will hide behind intellectual property law as a basis for not giving that stuff out, which is pretty bogus because we're dealing with defective products at best. So they should have to provide those. The source code, in theory, is held under escrow. But if you ask any election clerk if they've ever reviewed the source code, the answer is no. And even if they were given the source code, they wouldn't know how to analyze it. They wouldn't know what to look for. And we've interviewed whistleblowers, one of which is in Let My People Go, a guy by the name of Clay Parikh. He used to work for one of the testing labs. And he would just tell you that the testing was wholly inadequate. He calls it, there were no standards, they were just substandards. And they don't even give you the entirety of the source code to review as an expert. They give you a sliver of the code, which is meaningless to a cyber expert. So the people that rubber stamp the machines and tell you that they're certified have devised tests that are utterly meaningless in the cybersecurity world. And that's why a lot of states can tout that their elections are secure because some vending company has basically got a rubber stamp.
Yeah, it seems like the only other way that you would see the influx of those numbers is if they were opening the ballots per se, or like you said. I mean, it's either cheating or they're all kind of divvied up and separated. And it's like, well, let's put in all the votes for Biden first, and then let's put in all the votes for Trump. But even then, we know that the results or the votes wouldn't have been that big of a difference to where it created that spike in votes coming in for the preferred candidate that they wanted to win in the election. So it's either, you're seeing the votes, which they shouldn't be seeing the votes, or it's predetermined, like you're saying. So it just kind of it stinks all the way around, and it's really interesting to
Oh
look
yeah,
at.
that. But here's the deal. There's some people have speculated that someone is counting or uploading the votes in a way that favors Democrats, and that's what they call the blue shift. And excuse my French, it's complete bullshit. The people that posit that as an explanation for why you would see this descending pattern that favors Democrats know nothing about the voting process. So what people need to realize is that to maintain the quote unquote air gap, there is a physical delivery of those jump drives from a computer. The jump drives look the same. So there's no way that you can just look at them and go, by the look of this jump drive or this jump stick, I know that this one belongs to this far left precinct that votes for Biden. And I know that the next one is slightly less woke than that precinct. And then the next one is slightly less woke than that one. The sheer insanity of what Democrats have said to justify that linear drive shows that they've never participated in the voting process. So just somehow, flying blind, election workers have the wherewithal to plug in USBs that give them this descending pattern. That makes no sense, especially if you understand how precincts work and counties work. You've got urban areas that are full of Democrats, but typically your rural areas are more conservative leaning. So when you start looking at those patterns, you would think that the lower populations would be retrieved first, uploaded first, and counted first. So you'd
Mm,
actually see the exact opposite phenomena. Republican votes being counted first. Okay,
yeah.
so our experts have an understanding of these machines that are second to none. But that was one of the talking points that was put out there by the radical left to somehow diminish this devastating proof that we've witnessed.
Yeah, I don't see any other way it could work. Speaking of the air gap, that's here in Rankin County where I live. They've recently purchased, I guess, the first county in the country. It's the Hart Intercivic Verity Vanguard voting systems. Have you ever heard of those? So it's out of a company
Yes.
out of Austin, Texas. They claim the air gap design, all of that, the restrictions or the 2.0 certification alignment, all those things are supposed to keep it, safe. And it says no, that there's no internet connectivity whatsoever. So that's just not true.
No, it's not true on any level. In fact, Ken Paxton has chosen to withhold a whistleblower affidavit that would end the faux certification that's been provided to Hart Intercivic. Again, their certification does not have detailed testing of the equipment. It's the exact opposite. Hart Intercivic is actually the brand that we saw in Tarrant County, Texas. That's the one that we wrote on that added and deleted votes during the logic and accuracy test, which could only happen through programming. So this would have been a malicious actor that had access to those machines and programmed them not only to add and delete votes, but to manipulate ballot images. So
Hmm.
that was a Hart Intercivic machine in Texas that we just reported on. And here's the deal: a true air gap, you would never have even the device, a USB that you would put into the election management system. That in and of itself is, the exact opposite of an air gap, because those devices are, you can insert all kinds of things and programs into the election ecosystem, and that's demonstrated in Let My People Go through the use of USBs to subvert the system. So there is no way to protect these systems. The other avenue for subversion is you just go upstream with the vendors themselves. So the vendors at Hart will send what's known as a ballot definition file to the clerks, and that's what they use to prepare the ballot that's in their area. They don't know how to check the file that's being sent to them for whether or not there's malicious code or there's a subversion baked into that. There's a drop-down menu with 200 different options, and they don't understand what they're looking at. So if you infect that at the supplier level and download that code, you've basically loaded the weapon against the American people. So none of these clerks that are actually certifying the machines for use know how to check for that. None of them do physical inspections of the machines, inside the machines, to see if there's chip modems, Bluetooth. They are woefully ill-suited to making a determination on whether that machine is safe to use. And again, all you've got to do is, if you're a bad actor, is beat the quote-unquote logic and accuracy test. But the logic and accuracy test doesn't tell you how the machine performed on election day. That's what the cast vote records are for. And so when you go to places like, and ask for them from Hart Intercivic and ask for that vital record, They are stonewalling election auditors left and right because they know that the data will reveal subversion.
Yeah, and that's what I did want to say is I think that, or I guess we should hope that most of these clerks and most of these election officials are acting in good faith, but this is malicious stuff being done at the higher level. But something that I think they do have a lot of, I don't want to say influence over, but control of is the voter rolls. And we know that voter rolls are inflated. We know that, um, that there's just a lot of discrepancies in there as well. And then also the money that can be laundered through people who didn't actually make donations, voter registration, things like that. So what is some of the real evidence besides just the graphs that show the injections of numbers besides that as far as like Georgia and Texas that you've seen, and kind of besides the companies, who we said follow the money, who can we say is behind this stuff?
Okay. Well, look, the cast vote records that have been analyzed in roughly one third of the country. So you've got 3,000 plus counties. At least 1,000 counties that we've been able to evaluate show impossible arrangement of voting totals. So that's proof. That's quantitative proof of digital subversion and or ballot stuffing. You've seen the video evidence on Let My People Go of poll books checking in voters that weren't physically present, and that happened even in the 2024 election in Virginia, Pennsylvania, I think New Jersey. Same phenomena. They called it a glitch. It's not a glitch. It's a subversion that takes place to allow for some other bad actor to generate a fictitious and fraudulent ballot that's tied to the voter ID of a person that's not present. So we've seen that. We've seen quantitative proof of voter rolls being inflated in microseconds in places like Hawaii, New Mexico, Florida. So wherever we can get actual, timestamps and captures of the data day by day, we're seeing the same phenomena, which is a level of automation. You've got virtually no chain of custody at the ballot box. You've got people that are counting votes after Election Day. You've got facilities like Runback that were printing tens of thousands of ballots after Election Day, which were being loaded onto Penske trucks and headed to states where they continued to count votes after Election Day. That happened in California, Colorado, Nevada, Arizona. You've got purposeful malfunctioning of the machines in Republican precincts. This happened in Kerry Lake's race in Arizona, where only in Republican areas they printed missized ballots, knowing that those missized ballots would be rejected by the tabulator. They put them in drawer 3, again, with no chain of custody and no poll watchers. And those ballots, we don't know whether they're counted or not, but it only affected Republican-leaning areas. So, I mean, I could literally rattle off these kind of evidences and proofs for the next 12 hours straight because there's that much fraud. Point of the matter is, if you actually look at the law, the Help America Vote Act in particular, only allows for one error per 125,000 voting opportunities. So the standard when it comes to error is violated in every single state that we've reviewed. If we just look at their own data, and their data is skewed, but we look at risk limiting audit data in every state, and there's not a single state that actually passes the requirements under HAVA. We get gaslit, and we're told that, well, we saw 10 errors, and that's not enough to account for the margin of victory. Well, that's not what the law requires. The law requires basically cyber perfection, like you would at a bank. You don't want to do business at a bank where you just have errors that you can't explain, right? You'd like to know why the money in your account just magically appeared in someone else's account. These these types of subversions just don't play out in corporate America. But in our election systems, we've got all kinds of anomalies. And the reason why we don't see any action from law enforcement or political officials is that they got in somehow through these subverted processes. And the last thing they want to do is challenge a black box that let them get in. Because if they prove massive fraud, and they would, it would undermine their own power. It would undermine their own position. So it's a perfect ploy for people that want to retain power. Why would you want to look into election fraud if you're already elected? And that's one of the major problems we run into.
Do you think that obviously on a race like a presidential race, a Senate race, congressional race, I mean, do you think this kind of thing's happening like on the super local level? I mean, I know a lot of places will in a race that I actually ran in for alderman, they counted out loud the ballots, so you could sit there and kind of tally up by hand and have an idea of how many votes you got, and they put them up on the screen. I mean, is that close enough to getting back to? I mean, it's paper ballots, that's what they did. But then whenever you get it to the bigger races, it goes back to digital. I mean, do they care enough to try to commit this voter fraud on the local level? Is it the same people?
It's the same system architecture. So the whole point of mastering the system architecture is I can do all kinds of things, and it doesn't matter how honest your clerk is at the local level. That's the whole point of having a nation state attack of the software and hardware is you can digitally alter things after the fact. Before a race, you could pre-program things. So do we see it in every single county? Not in places that are inconsequential. And in fact, you want to have some honest precincts because whenever you do your quote unquote random audits, which aren't random, by the way, the bad actors know where to send the auditors, and they want to send them to the places that they know are roughly left alone. But you can bet your bottom dollar that in urban areas that control the statewide ballot, good luck getting a full forensic audit. It's almost impossible. They'll give you, samples. They'll give you ballot images, and again, we've already established that they can manipulate the images. So looking at the images don't do anything for you, or they give you such a small number that it's impossible to derive any sound conclusions about whether there was fraud. But to answer your question, we've seen fraud down to the precinct level in rural counties, for sure. And this is a process that you want to continue to exploit if you're a bad actor. So you don't quit. You don't say all we need are these 5 counties. The vote is power. And the more people you can get into a very tainted system, the more corrupt it becomes. And so, yeah, we've seen school board races, we've seen local judicial races, and inexplicable data patterns from the data that we've reviewed. To the degree that we can get it, it's alarming at the stuff that we're finding.
Yeah, like you said, they claim that it's, cheat proof, but the evidence proves otherwise. And most people aren't gonna challenge it after they're, done running a 6 month year long campaign. They're exhausted, they're tired, they're like, I lost, by 40, 50, 150 votes. They just kind of take it like, oh, that's it. And I think what you said earlier kind of proves the science that they've perfected in that of, well, nobody's going to question it when it's just a slight victory, as opposed to just a massive blowout. I was looking
That's
at
the
it.
thing. No one knows whether the vote totals are honest enough to even make the assertion that it's a close race or a blowout. I mean, I ask people, how do you know? Well, I know because I watched it on the TV. I know because I watched the website. But those outputs, as I mentioned earlier, how you get to those numbers, there's 1,000 different ways to manipulate those numbers. So a lot of it's just perception theater. And so these candidates are going, they're taking the vote totals that are being reported to them at face value as if those are accurate numbers. That's part of why this system's so pernicious, is that people have been so brainwashed and deluded into thinking that the data is accurate. There's nothing accurate about the data that we're seeing, both on what's reported on the websites, on the TV screen, And certainly what's being tabulated in those tabulators, there's you know, it still baffles me that people could be so gullible.
I can hear you. Well, look, I want to switch gears a little bit. Um, Obviously, another talking point that I kind of want to hit on is Charlie Kirk. I know you covered him a little bit in some of your content that you have on your two page. We all know about Charlie Kirk and just kind of what he thought about the American experiment, his ambitions, his goal, the way that TPUSA kind of evolved. He was a God fearing guy, and there was people that celebrated his death, but he emphasized how important it was to get involved in the process. And I just kind of, in your opinion, how much I think I know how much of a role he played in helping get Donald Trump elected, but you kind of have some insight on that. Is that correct, or just kind of what your opinion is on that, and just kind of where um where we go from now as far as keeping that up?
Well, talking about Charlie is difficult because you have to recognize he's a force. He was a force to be reckoned with for conservative issues. With that said, when it came to election prescriptions, Turning Point's been terrible, and Charlie was not great at any of the things that he professed to be great about when it came to elections. His talking points were in lockstep with the RNC. The RNC is corrupt. His talking points were in lockstep with the way that the Democrats vote. And more importantly, his talking points were in lockstep with the intelligence agencies that rig our elections. So what do I mean by that? So this isn't about anything personal. I think Charlie's a wonderful human being, and maybe he just didn't know. But early voting favors the fraudsters. That's a fact. Election day favors integrity. Use of the machines favors the fraudsters. I remember a pastor, a friend of mine, that went to a Turning Point faith conference and asked Charlie about the use of the machines, and Charlie got very, very defensive. And he said that he had not seen any evidence that the machines played a role in subverting our elections. I'm sorry, that's insane. That's insanity. It's lunacy. And to prove his point, he pointed to a cyber expert on the stage that was sitting there with him, and the name of that person is Bob List, or Robert List, who's the former governor of Nevada, and at the time was a lobbyist for Dominion voting. And so I'm sitting there going, okay,
Asking the wrong
fix
guy.
is in. I don't quite understand it. Well, and he knows better because people in my circle told him nonstop. And whenever I presented evidence on Bannon's War Room about automated voter rolls being inflated, Charlie worked behind the scenes to tell Steve Bannon to get me off the show. So I have a slightly different experience with Charlie. And for those that idolize him and kind of prop him up, this is probably very, very difficult for them to hear. But at the end of the day, there's about $105 million that was allocated to Turning Point coffers for their ballot chasing operation. And the whole idea was that we're going to beat Democrats at their own game. That was the premise. Like, we've got to go out and hustle and collect more ballots where we can legally, whether it's a college dorm room, whether it's a nursing home. But here's the problem. That's not how the Democrats are winning. The Democrats were utilizing, and the Uniparty, because there's Republicans that benefit from this as well, were printing tens of thousands of fraudulent ballots at facilities like Runbeck. So unless Republicans would have a printing press at their disposal, you're not going to win that game. And we knew that. We communicated that to Charlie. So again, it's a touchy subject even now. When I put out my thoughts, I want to know about the moneyed interest. I also know that Charlie Kirk was asking for a Doge-like audit just 8 days before he was assassinated. And so he was troubled by some of the financial picture of Turning Point USA. He started to question the response from IDF in Israel, a 6 hour delay that, in his mind, was just inexplicable given the surveillance capabilities of Israel, their government. And it was largely suggested or inferred from Charlie that people that wanted to commit ethnic genocide in the region, they were going to use that as an opportunity to have the mandate to clear out the Gaza Strip. And so here you have this fierce champion of Israel asking very, very tough questions and coming under scrutiny from many of the APAC types. And then you could chalk it up to coincidence of his assassination. So, it's a mixed bag. I saw great courage from him on free speech. I think he was a force for good on the campus for his faith, for his Christian witness. He was ever an ally of Israel. And I think actually his tough questions to the IDF shows that he really did care and he did have integrity. But when it came to elections, I mean, if I'm giving him the report card, Turning Point fails. They fail miserably. But I think the reason why they avoided the topic when it came to the machines is because they had so much money that gave them a prescription to nowhere, but they took the money. And that's the truth as I see it. So, otherwise you won't hear a negative peep from me on anything to do with Charlie Kirk. But on election security, he got more wrong than he got right.
Yeah, I definitely think that he was used. I think he was exploited. Um, he definitely spoke his mind, and he had a devotion, like you said, to Jesus that I think we should all carry, and he definitely inspired a lot of young people. But I definitely think that there is a lot of things, especially when he was calling for that Doge-like audit, that really started to maybe allow him to open his eyes because he didn't see what was going on behind the scenes, and so. He did love Israel, but he started to have those questions, and so I kind of agree with you. I think that um, the GOP is and will continue to kind of exploit a lot of that work that he had done. But I look at it as he did wake a lot of people up. I think he did expose some evil, and I think his work will be carried on. It's kind of what we hope for as far as it's getting the next generation involved. But I definitely believe that there is a lot of cash flowing in places that he probably started to realize um, wasn't doing a lot of good. And like you said, that was also feeding him a prescription to the wrong thing. And so I hate to use the word naive, but I just don't think he knew exactly
No,
what he was getting
and
into.
he shouldn't. You should. No, I don't buy that for a second. You can't be. This is the great conundrum that I call conservative Inc. That they are messaging geniuses. There's no better skilled debater. That's why they've got actual videos of this person destroys this person, destroys that, and they are just absolute geniuses in their ability to debate, engage in conversation. But all of a sudden, when it came to the machines, they're aloof idiots. I don't buy that for a second. And it's like if you were to have that kind of laxity to the Turning Point banking accounts, I mean, can we believe for a second Charlie would, you know, put up with $7 million going from this account to that account? No, he
Sure.
wouldn't. So I think it's one of those things where you've got to look at a lot of these entities as constructs from the intelligence agencies. You're looking at an entity that was worth $250 million when it came to revenue. They were big time players, movers and shakers on the young people. And so I think to the degree that he could court young people and galvanize a movement, it made him extremely powerful. But there were strings attached, and I think he started pushing back, to his credit, on certain strings that were attached to him, where perhaps he felt like he was under judgment. I mean, if you're going to be a mouthpiece for Jesus Christ, I have to imagine that his soul was probably pierced on things that he was seeing, because apparently he made predictions. He was in fear for his life. He thought it was a possibility that he would be killed or assassinated, and that's been widely disseminated. If you get, I try not to get into the Candace Erica stuff. It's not my cup of tea. But the point is, apparently from sources that were very close to Charlie, he thought someone was going to take him out. So the question is, what did he see that made him, retain his convictions to such a degree that he was going to continue asking tough questions, maybe not about elections, but about Israel. And the more that I learn about our election systems and the donor power, when Matt Gaetz goes around and tells you that you've got elected officials that are going around with a QR code, and IPAC lobbyists can scan the QR code and make donations to them right then and there, basically it's like they're trading cattle. If you've got that kind of monetary interest in your politicians, why wouldn't they be interested in our election systems? So I'm willing to think that the $105 million worth of money that was allocated towards ballot chasing really served the interest of foreign countries that liked the fact that our government is so influenceable on both sides of the aisle. And it wasn't about America first. It was about Israel first, or Ukraine first. I mean, whatever foreign country you want to look at was placed ahead of the American interest. And so maybe Charlie would have figured it out eventually. But as someone who was in the election integrity space for 5 years, I know the messages that were relayed. I know the conversations that were had backstage with many of the movers and shakers at Turning Point. And they knew that these election machines presented a problem, and they ignored them because they were paid money to ignore them. And that's the hard, God's honest truth. If that offends people, I'm sorry, but I feel like I've got to tell people the truth.
Yeah, no, I don't doubt you at all. It's, I think a lot of it is hard to ingest, but you're right, and it's all connected. I think something like 80% of Congress, takes money from Israel. So, I think that they saw. I kind of look at it as, we see this guy that has a big following. We can potentially get those votes to help keep us in power in these different areas, but then we also have the backup plan. We also have the machines, which may be not the backup plan, and it all kind of works in together. So I think, and maybe I said that wrong, but I think that he started to kind of have, like you said, just kind of a moment of judgment where it was like, I'm starting to see
We
things
don't know.
that I'm not okay with. Yeah.
We don't we don't know. And here's the thing that just shows you how he's impacted people, that they want to go out of their way to, think and give him the out. And that's fine, but we're speculating, right? I mean, so like, I don't want to guess about those things. I think it's enough to say that Charlie Kirk uh, did a great service to Christians in the witnessing of his faith. I think many people came to Christ through him. He ascended power in a way that was unique to someone who was as young as he was, and likely would have been a future president at some point. I mean, his trajectory was, you know, he was destined for the stars. But here's the deal: when you are in that world, you're in a nation-state environment. You're surrounded by spooks, intelligence actors, and there's a Faustian deal that is being offered at every second. If you're playing with the big boys, and he was playing with the big boys, so I don't think we have to belabor or struggle or do anything other than realize that he's just like anyone else. He probably made really good decisions and bad decisions, and that's life, right? But looking at his legacy, there's only one Charlie Kirk. He's left a huge, huge, gaping hole for leadership for young people, and that's what I'm going to choose to remember him by is that legacy. because at the end of the day, people are deluding themselves into thinking that we really have a say in who gets elected or not. The reason why Trump got elected in 2024 isn't because of Turning Point. It's because President Trump had the authority to have a series of interventions that stopped digital cheating and mass influx of mail-in ballots at an industrial scale level. Those are the two things that he was able to cure in 2024 that he couldn't before. And Turning Point prescriptions had nothing to do with that. So that's every national security expert that I've talked with, the whistleblowers over at Smartmatic from Venezuela, CIA former operative Gary Bernstein, this is well documented that there was an intervention that didn't allow the digital injection of votes, and this happened in Serbia just before the election in 2024, and that's why Trump won. He had a plan.
Gotcha. Yeah. Speaking of Trump, you know, he said before that, we need a savior. America needs a savior, and it's not him. It's someone higher than him. He obviously has a belief in God, and I think that says a lot about him. I think that he's done some really good things, and you've talked some about Trump's plans and for upcoming elections, and I think you even mentioned the National Guard earlier and how it would possibly be involved. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit more and what you mean by that? I had someone ask that question, like, well, how would the military get involved and what could they do? Because I know you said at the meeting last week, like, if you think it's confusing to us, imagine how it feels to his enemies. And then I thought, like, that's it. Like, that's why it's so confusing, because I think this guy's playing chess, and he's really, the things that he's been doing are genius, but we just don't understand it.
Well, if you follow him long enough, you see a method to his madness. When Trump posts something, give it enough time, it comes true. I mean, he's got a remarkable predictive power on the things that he calls that end up being revealed at a later date. So he's not throwing out things just so he can be proven wrong. So when he says that we're not going to use mail-in ballots, and irrespective of Congress's feelings on the matter, that's telling me that he's going to use his national security power as commander in chief to effectuate an election that doesn't use those mail-in ballots. And by extension, you're not going to use the rigged machines to scan them through. So how do you do that? You look at Article 2 of the Constitution, and you start looking at the plenary authority of the commander-in-chief. And as the commander-in-chief, he's responsible with safeguarding the nation's critical infrastructure, which includes elections. And so if there are imminent attacks on the critical infrastructure, he doesn't have to ask for the approval of Congress to stop riggers from rigging the election. It's absurd to suggest otherwise. He's not under any duty to listen to a Supreme Court that says you can't stop a hack. So within the laws that are already on the books, he can act with great power. Now, to the degree that the states get upset because each state constitution confers the state legislatures with the power to set the time, manner, and place of elections, they could say no. Okay, when it comes to the statewide ballot, we don't have to do anything Trump tells us to do. And that could be true. The problem is that they have to follow Trump's executive orders when it comes to federal races. And in 2026, every state has a U.S. Senate race and a U.S. congressional race. So you might have a separate hand-counted race that's done only for two races. And if the clerks don't want to allocate staff, he could deploy the National Guard to do hand counting of two races per ballot. Be very easy to do. If he wanted to impose his will on the statewide ballot, every state takes funding from the federal government, the Help America Vote Act in particular, to fund and pay for the electronic tabulation machines. What happens when Scott Bessent over at the Treasury is called up by the president and the president says, due to national security concerns, the defective nature of these machines, stop the disbursements of money to the states? You'd effectively bankrupt them, and there's nothing they could do about it because most states do not have balanced budgets. Most have a depleted general fund, and most are wholly dependent on the federal printing press to give them the federal monies. But here's the deal: if you take the federal monies, you got to take the strings that are attached. So Trump has tremendous leverage to conduct a election in a way that comports with national security. And if he's not going to have willing clerks, he's not going to let unwilling clerks dictate to him security. So I just tell people, like, look, if you can extract the president of Venezuela in the dark of night with Delta Force, I think he's got the wherewithal to deploy the National Guard to count, because that's in effect all they have to do is count.
What do you think is going to happen with some of the election fraud, that had been found from 2020? Do you think he's going to do anything with that? I mean, or that's going to be part, obviously, of what you just said. It's going to say, based on everything that we've seen, everything we've found, there's problems here. So this is why we're going to do that. Is he kind of going to bring that back up as evidence and use that for the 2026 elections? You think?
It'd be helpful. I mean, look, the American people, if you look at polling places like Rasmussen, we've proved that the elections are fraudulent. The court of public opinion, we've won there. Now, just because CNN doesn't want to report what the American people feel about elections, but across the board, I mean, roughly 72% of all Americans do not trust the machines. That is a staggering number to behold. So I think Trump can just point to the stuff that's already been discovered. But he also has disclosed that he has ordered the DNI, ODNI, NSA, CIA to declassify some of the information related to 2020 that will now be made available for the first time. So whenever that comes out, it's going to be so definitive that not only will we conduct elections the way that Trump directs the National Guard to undertake them, but people are going to go to jail. He actually had one of the very, very famous truth posts about putting out a cease and desist that anyone caught up in election fraud is going to be prosecuted. So I remember that, and you got a lot of people that are walking around with a sense of false confidence, and their world's going to be rocked. So my prediction is that this stuff has to continue to drip, 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 make its way to the American people. And you do that in tandem with the continued revelations in the Epstein files of elites that are doing the most despicable, disgusting things, where the American people not only will have an appetite to get rid of the rigged elections, but they'll have a reason to do so, knowing that they've been sold out by a bunch of pedophiles. There was a story that was just broke today or yesterday where Woody Allen's child bride had emails to Epstein for these cakes that were used in spirit cooking. So the essence or fluids from human bodies were being consumed. I mean, the most disgusting things are just being revealed every day. Clinton had her deposition today through a congressional subpoena. She was grilled over Pizzagate and the stuff that's there. Her husband's up tomorrow. So, I mean, right now, we're seeing massive, massive exposure of the elites, and I don't expect it to stop.
Yeah, I see it, like you said, just kind of as a drip, and I see people all the time. There's so much real information, there's so much disinformation, and people are like, why hasn't anything happened? Why aren't people being arrested? And it's hard to explain. Like it has to be, it has to drip out. It has to be, in conjunction with the election stuff. It has to be in conjunction with because if you drop everything at one time, people are going to forget by the time elections come around. So it's like it's very methodical. It's very smart the way that he's doing it. And before we get into some more of the Epstein stuff, I know you had said that in one of your videos about that there's even a possible way of him getting a third term. And you use examples as the Constitution being amended, excuse me, running as a VP or even, through the Speaker of the House, or you even, bringing up the stolen election theory of how that could be brought back up as well. Do you think that that's a possibility? Like, do you really see him doing that?
I don't know. I just know that
There's
the
ways.
American people have buy-in and trust with Trump. right? And I don't know if there's a successor that has captured the heart and minds of Americans. I mean, if you look at polls, uh, people will say J.D. Vance is the successor, but we also remember Pence being the number two. A lot can happen. I mean, basically, Pence wrecked his political fortunes by selling out the American people. So, all I could tell you is that I mapped out how it can be done, and the best way to do it is to run a clean election in 2026 and repeal the 22nd Amendment. So there's no legal impediment to him serving a third term, because you really can't get around the 22nd Amendment. It basically says you get 2 terms. That's it. And if you count 2016 and 2024, we're at 2 terms. There's some unique speculation and theorizing of whether or not he's still in his first term, if he triggered continuity of government, which I believe he did. So this could be one extended first term, but that is a conspiracy for another day. I think it's more legitimate than people realize, but it's a deep dive that requires a lot of analysis. And I think I'm at the hour and 8 mark, Chris. So I'm going to probably have to jump off if you want to wrap up with maybe one last question.
Yeah, I think we're pretty close. So again, with the Epstein stuff, I agree with you. I think you had mentioned this last week was just, um, how does this change things? And I think you just kind of answered that. What you see going on, I saw today where it was actually broken that there was he was actually had the Israelis that were in his Manhattan apartment who had installed security devices, all security systems. So now it's coming out that he was actually working with these folks. So I think like you said, that I think Trump knew that the election could be rigged, and that was the only way he was going to lose. But now it's that people have taken their foot off the brake. So I think, would you agree that this revelation of just the evil things that we're seeing come out now is going to help the trajectory? And I love what you said. I think America needs just kind of a national repentance, if you will. And I feel like this is everything. You had mentioned this in some of your videos. It's a shaking up of the world, and we're just kind of seeing that now. And I'm optimistic about the future. Do you feel the same about all that?
Yeah, I do, Chris. I do. I think the rededication of America to being one nation under God, it would fulfill what's mentioned in 2 Chronicles 7:14, where we repent, we turn our faces back to the Lord, we confess our national sins, and we beg for forgiveness so He can bless and heal our land. And I think we're positioned for that, given the dark stuff that we're learning from the Epstein files. So I've got tremendous optimism going forward.
Awesome. Well, look, I appreciate you. I hope to have you on again sometime, as more things unfold. I know you're a busy man, so I appreciate you taking the time, and I appreciate all the work you're doing. And if there's anything I could ever do for you, I don't know what I could, but I'm here for you. Definitely spreading the message of what I've learned from you, and taking it to heart, and trying to share that with as many people as possible. And we'll obviously post the link to Let My People Go, because I think it's a great documentary. I think there's a lot of people that don't understand everything that was implicated in all of that, and how much hope we should have for the future. And really, I hate to say this, but trust the process and trust the system and what's going on. I look at the work that you do, and I say, you know what, that's where you can put the evidence with the trust the system, as opposed to just cross your fingers and trust it. But look at what's going on. Look at what has gone on. Look how we can connect the dots here, and really know that there's good people working behind the scenes, that don't always get noticed or don't always want to be noticed, but it's happening. And so I appreciate you. I'm optimistic like you are, and thank you. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Chris. It was a pleasure meeting you. Keep, supplying fresh leadership for our young people, and, Thank you for the conversation. God bless you.
God bless you. Talk to you soon.